This is Keys to the Shop, episode 367, How to Design Your Coffee Shop for Community, with Dr. Lisa Waxman. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio, and I'm your host for the show, and I am so thankful that you decided to tune in today. And if you're new to the show, or if you just haven't gotten around to it yet, I would really be grateful if you'd hit the subscribe button, and that way you'll never miss any of these episodes as they come out. Helps the show a lot, and also what helps the show is to share these episodes around your friend group, with your team, with your boss, pretty much anyone who you can think would benefit from great conversations about coffee and coffee shops, leadership, and everything in between. So thank you, everybody, for doing that. Now, on top of doing this podcast, Keys to the Shop also offers consulting and coaching. Keys to the Shop Consulting helps independent coffee shop owners like yourself gain control of their daily operations, manage cafe growth, develop themselves as leaders, and truly care for and retain their staff, all to create a sustainable, thriving coffee business. In the midst of running a coffee bar, things get really busy, things get really stressful, and it's hard to level up from where you currently are and to find a foothold and to find the clarity to do that. And that's what Keys to the Shop Consulting is all about doing for you. And the proven Keys to the Shop Consulting process has helped dozens of businesses similar to yours to find that clarity through the many questions and challenges of running a coffee shop and really find the joy in the journey of running a cafe. So if that is interesting to you and you want to talk further, go ahead and email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS@keystotheshop.com. We'll set up a free discovery call, and we'll talk all about how Keys to the Shop Consulting can help you. Now, we all know that a cup of coffee is not just a cup of coffee. There's a lot of work that goes into making just a single cup come into fruition. And it's kind of disappointing when you get an underwhelming cup of coffee. So many customers in cafes around the world get batch brew coffee, and they will judge whether or not we are a quality cafe based on the quality of that drink. And that's why I'm so excited that a company like Voga Coffee has come around and invented the Ground Control Cyclops Brewer. The Ground Control Brewer is absolutely revolutionizing what we can expect from batch brewers by using its SCA award-winning technology to give the user control over an incredible range of flavors. And with such precision over the extraction, it truly is changing the game. And not only is it in a league of its own with batch brewing, but it also makes tea, batch iced lattes, batch cold brew, and it's easy to train your staff on, beautiful to look at. So check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee to learn more. If you're interested in providing your customers with the maximum amount of flavor and consistency in your coffee, and also you want to increase your efficiency and open up avenues for profitability, then you should absolutely look into getting a Ground Control Cyclops Brewer in your store. Again, you can check them out over at groundcontrol.coffee. Now, our industry is built on relationships. I don't think anybody would argue about that. And one of the things that I love seeing is when companies create relationships and build bridges and try to understand exactly what the end user is trying to attain with their product. One of the companies that has done that so well is the Barista series from Pacific. This is a line of plant-based performance beverages that are designed for baristas. They are in communication with and relationship with baristas around the world to make sure that their products stand up to the heat from steaming, provide amazing texture for latte art, and have a flavor balance in the final beverage that focuses on the coffee. These are things that they know the industry wants. They are constantly promoting the specialty coffee industry and its people. That's one of the things I love about them, as well as the fact that they are the leader in quality plant-based products. So check them out over at pacificfoodservice.com and get samples in your store and try it with all of your beverages and see what you think. I think you're really going to be impressed. If you're looking to serve your customers the best plant-based drinks to showcase your coffee well and get happy baristas in the process, then I really think it needs to be the Barista series from Pacific. Okay, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking with a returning guest to the show. Dr. Lisa Waxman is our guest, and previously was on the show in episode 169, Designing the Guest Experience. Now, if you don't know, Dr. Lisa Waxman, PhD, is Professor Emerita in the Interior Architecture and Design Department at Florida State University. Her research includes topics related to the design of spaces that foster community, sustainable design, and design for special populations. She is an NCI DQ certified holder, a lead AP and registered interior designer, and Dr. Waxman has served in many capacities on the board of Interior Design Educators Council, including President-elect, President, and past President from 2010 to 2013, and she was honored as a fellow of IDEC in 2008. Now, she has written in her career prolifically on this, has been hugely influential. She has an incredible number of scholarly works and creative works and awards to her name. And I would encourage you all to listen to our last episode with Dr. Waxman in episode 169 as a primer to this one, because she has just come out with a new book. It's called Designing Coffee Shops and Cafes for Community. Now, we touched on this subject pretty well in episode 169, and we dive even deeper into this. This new book is fantastic, and it really focuses in on the nitty-gritty of how to build literally a cafe whose bones, whose structure, whose layout, the sensory aspects of what a physical space is, to be able to foster the community that we all say that we want when we open a coffee bar. But sometimes we make decisions about our spaces, we don't even realize that it's actually moving against community. And so in this conversation with Dr. Waxman, we dive into lots of different subjects from within the book to give you some practical next steps for either your next coffee shop or maybe rearranging the way that things are in your current coffee shop, just so that you can set it up to really foster that community that brings people together in that third place and connects them to your brand. So I'm excited to have gotten a chance to sit down again with Dr. Waxman. I hope that you really enjoy this conversation and you find it very, very useful. I think you will. So without anything else from me, let's get right to it. Here now is my conversation about designing your coffee shop for community with Dr. Lisa Waxman. All right, Dr. Waxman, welcome back to Keys to the Shop. I'm so excited to have you back on the show.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to share what I've been working on.
Yeah, and it is really, really a spectacular book. This is the kind of topic that we in coffee need to learn more about all the time because, ostensibly, this is why we're doing coffee for a lot of us. I hear it all the time. We're here for community. We want to serve our community. And in our last conversation, we were talking about how to design the guest experience. That's what we ended up titling it. And now you've got this over 200-page book on designing coffee shops for community. And this is something I think everybody should just have in their library because we need to have practical applications for how to encourage that. So must be such a arduous process to put something like this together.
It was something that I'd been wanting to do for quite some time, and so I'm happy that I was able to carve out the time to get it done, and I hope it's of value to folks out there.
Yeah, I was pleased in the back of the book where there's case studies to see that you actually had a case study of Spencer's, who is a past guest on the show here, and a good friend of mine.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
that was trying to think. Is that Bowling Green?
Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's right.
Yeah, it's Bowling Green, Kentucky.
That was pretty fun. A little convergence of worlds there. But let's start out, just by kind of exploring the topic of community, as this whole book is sort of centered on that as the goal of the content, right? So when we're talking about community in the third place, before writing this book, I know you have a pretty firm grasp on that, but I'm kind of curious, before writing this, what was your understanding? And then now, how has that kind of shifted or evolved as a result of writing this?
Sure. I've been interested in the topic of gathering places, specifically third places, those places that aren't home or work, but sort of the other places that become really important in our lives. I've been, interested in that for 20 years now. And as a university professor, research is part of our assignment, and so this was what I've been focusing on. And prior to writing the book, I had done some research, but I thought of coffee shops and cafes as in more of a transactional way. Like people come in, they experience the space, they hopefully uh, have a great cup of coffee, and I saw it more as a, people coming in, utilizing the space. But I think what I learned most in writing the book was more about the inherent human need for connection and the biological roots that shape that need, and learned a lot about the impact on loneliness, on mental health, and how that ties in then to the growing need for that sense of community and places that support that need. So I would say that the research helped me sort of humanize the experience more than I had done in the past.
Oh, interesting. And when you say that and you look over the contents of the book, there are things as practical as lighting and textures. But then there are things like you just mentioned in the very front of the book where you talk about human connection and the need for, like there's place attachment is one of the things you talk about. And dive a little bit deeper into that idea of the biological need for a third place and community, because when I hear you say that, my mind is thinking, well, everything around us seems like it is either consciously or subconsciously sort of a construct of need, like what we think we need, and coffee shops may be one of those things. So when you say there's this root, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, there's so much that's been written recently about our need for connection and our need for others. There's a great book called Together by Dr. Vivek Murthy that talks about how people are wired for connection. And he writes that human relationships are as essential to our well-being as food and water. And so, we live in a world today where we move about a lot. It's easy to be mobile, and it's a global world. So many times we're very connected with a lot of places that we wouldn't have been 100 years ago, but we aren't always as connected kind of with that local community. And so loneliness is a real significant risk factor in overall health. And, the number of people who reported feeling lonely, say 40 years ago versus today, is increased. It's just mind blowing, from 20% to 60%, from 1980 to 2019. And that's of course before the pandemic. And so, we also know that building connection is really important for sort of the social capital of the community. The idea that, I do for you and you do for me in return, and we can kind of count on each other. And so that social capital gets strengthened when we know each other, or at least know of each other. We don't have to be best friends and see each other every day, but just that feeling that we have a sense of responsibility for the well-being of the community and for one another. And so some of the places that we can create through coffee shops, and it doesn't have to be coffee shops. It could be bowling alleys or hair salons or fitness centers. There are lots of places that provide this opportunity for people to just cross paths, bump elbows, or even have just a quick conversation that strengthen their feelings of belonging, strengthen their sense of community, that they sort of have a place to be.
Yeah, I like that idea of strengthening and also coming alongside people's latent desires to have that, where maybe it's because of, the social construct changing with more isolated, the apps of social media and the other kinds of, advents of technology that make us independent and not able or not need to rely on each other as much for practical things, and therefore we don't get the byproduct of relying each other for social things. But, people want it, and we can encourage it. And I guess that's like you mentioned, bowling alleys and hair salons. And people will, gather by the river if they want to have a, meeting or just get what they may not explicitly, they can't explicitly state it, but they know they need it. So I guess my question here is like, who's in charge of creating a third space? Is it the people who create it, or is it the professionals who see the need to enter into a space and then tap into that need by creating a space for it?
That's a great question, and I think that really both are involved. I think that there are all kinds of great examples where places just happen. They just happen. It can be, like you said, the place down by the river, or the park bench that, where two retired guys meet every morning to chat or whatever. So absolutely, those places can just happen, and they do all the time. But I think professionals and operators of coffee shops, if that is their goal, and so many people that I talk to who are in the business, that is a goal for them. That is a real high priority for them. So if it is, and they want to create that, then I think that there are some things that they can do to sort of help move that along, sort of by setting the tone of the establishment. They create kind of the vibe through their attitude, their attention and service to the patrons, and the design. Of course, that's my area, but that all makes a difference. So I think it can happen both ways, and it can really happen in tandem. An operator can do the best possible job sometimes, and it might just not end up being a gathering place, or things can happen sort of accidentally. But I think you can still kind of lay that foundation, and make sure that you and your staff kind of know what you're going for, what you're after. So much of it has to do with kind of how you feel, whether you feel welcome, whether you feel like you belong there.
You mentioned what you're going for, and I think that's interesting because the commercialization of coffee over the years in the coffee shop has led to a lot of people borrowing the verbiage from the third place and saying, we want to be a community gathering place, but really, the design is such that it's meant to push people out of community, to, make it transactional so that it's profitable, and people have a right to sort of say, hey, well, we want this to be profitable, and if people are just like playing Parcheesi all day long over the community table, then why we can't make money. So we have to make the chairs uncomfortable and give electric shocks to people's feet and whatever we can think of. So I guess the question is, as we go forward, is what do we want to do? Do you really want a community gathering place? But what is the balance between community success and commercial success? What's the correlation between these two?
Yeah, that's a good point. And I one of the things I learned in my research was the term campers. You might be familiar with that too. And those are the people who come in and stay for hours, which can sometimes be a problem. Maybe they're students who spread out their homework and are there for 3 hours. Or I've even seen people, hold interviews and, kind of completely do their books in coffee shops and be there for hours. So that is definitely a concern for people who need the tables available. But generally speaking, getting back to your question, what's the balance between, kind of community success and commercial success? People are drawn to well-designed cities and towns, and, we can all think of places that we like to go that are fun, or places that we enjoy living because of what they have to offer. And so people look for those special attributes that support their needs. It could be a great job, or education, or that sense of community. And so when you have successful community gathering spots, they attract people who are looking for that. And so it kind of works hand in hand. If you build it, they will come, I guess. So I think there's definitely a strong relationship between community success and commercial success, or at least a feeling of vibrancy in the community.
Yeah, I think there's a huge correlation there too, and people, know they're in a place of commerce for the most part, so we don't necessarily have to worry too much about everybody kind of taking advantage of the space. And I guess maybe there's a idea that community is always going to be like long term and very very deep and involved, but it can happen quickly too. Like even just regular meetings that people have don't need to last hours for it to be community.
Right. And there's a great term that I really love, and it's the term of familiar strangers. And it's the idea that you come into a space and you see the same people day after day, and you might just nod a hello to them, but that actually they become part of your orbit, and it's very informal and very organic. But it's the idea that you've seen them and they've seen you, and you've had a kind of an outing. That's really interesting. I remember interviewing some students who were new to the country, and they were having a little bit of trouble with the language and that kind of thing. But they were in the coffee shop because it made them feel like they had been out and about, and they didn't meet anybody. They didn't have a long conversation even with the barista, but they had this sort of social experience that was really valuable to them. It made them help them feel engaged and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, and we can enhance that experience on purpose and sort of give them another level of being accepted and enhance that feeling of having been in a place that's meaningful for a tangible or intangible reason, right? And so that's kind of the thrust of the book here. So I want to dive into the book a little bit. What are some of the key components that are associated with why people are attached to place? It seems like we imprint as people, as humans, we imprint pretty easily on things. Like this is mine, this is mine, this is my coffee shop, and that kind of thing. So what's behind that? Talk to us about the key factors to make our place actually a place where people attach to.
Yeah, so there's a whole body of work out there on place attachment by folks who have studied it their whole careers. Seth Lowe is one of the main authors on that. But people become attached to places for a variety of reasons, and that attachment is often places where they spend a lot of time. It could be where they've grown up. It could be where they have important economic ties. It could be just generations have been there. So there are lots of reasons why place attachment develops. But essentially, it's that feeling of being rooted, kind of that feeling that you have a place to sort of be in the world and stand in the world where you matter. And so these places often lay claim to, our affections and help us create memories. And sometimes they're places that are very unique to you. Like someone else would come in and say like, ooh, I don't know about this. I don't know if I'd want to be here, but it works for a population. In coffee shops and cafes, I did a lot of research and interviews and surveys and talk to people, and some of the things I found in common when it came to coffee shops and what drew people, they liked the opportunity to socialize, even if it was just quick and casual with the barista or with a couple of patrons. Some people had groups that they met every day, like say retired men meeting in the morning. Others went there to be productive. And then conversation can also be really important. So spaces that support conversation can be helpful. And then that opportunity to linger, which is, I guess a blessing and a curse. If people are staying and there aren't seats available for new patrons, that can become a problem. But that it was one of the draws is that, once you've purchased a beverage, you can kind of sit and linger and you can people watch or get something done. And then people also often went there to feel productive. So It could be the chance to study or read, grade papers, look over a report, that kind of thing. And often people feel like they're less likely to lose focus or head to the refrigerator or decide they should do laundry or those types of other things that we all do when we're home and procrastinating. And then other things that happen related to place attachment were people often developed a sense that it was their place. I think you mentioned that a few minutes ago. And so they develop feelings of ownership. And most of the time, this is a really positive feeling. It's their place, and they begin to care about it. Sometimes they want a little bit more control and say over things that are done, but so that can be the negative side. And then it's also common for patrons to sort of territorialize, meaning they may have favorite seats or tables, and most of the time that's positive. But then some of the really interesting pieces that I found were that patrons appreciate trust and respect and even sometimes support from staff. So one of the great quotes I got was, "You have to know the staff care and that it is a safe place." And then I also saw these great examples of people offering support to one another, like just as something as simple as keeping an eye on your computer while you go grab your coffee, but even more, sometimes people would offer rides to the airport. And so these sort of kind deeds happened because people had the chance to get to know each other in the space. And so it really was a source of support, and then that often leads to this strong attachment.
So when you have a space that is extremely efficient and streamlined and designed in a way that is purely functional for the transaction, it feels like you're closing down possibilities for people to imprint and get some kind of ownership from that. I don't feel ownership necessarily over the kiosk of coffee in the airport at O'Hare.
Right.
And it's only because it's very much set up with a machine right in front. They take my money, I get my coffee, that's it. And there might be some possibility there. But in coffee shops, it feels like we have to balance possibilities with purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the design, and whether it be the coffee kiosk in the airport or something that says, come on in and sit down, there's messages that are sent from those types of spaces that kind of inform you on what you're going to do. And as a designer, when I walk into space, I take in sort of all the aspects of the building and the ambience and kind of break them down. But the average patron is just taking in that experience sort of in totality, the first impression and the way they're greeted. And one thing is the friendliness of the staff too makes such a difference.
Yeah, you're given permission to sort of let your guard down. We're all kind of on guard throughout the day, and it's nice to be able to be in a place where it is, like you said, safe and that people care. That's really huge. If I want to get practical about place attachment, I mean, what are the physical things of a coffee bar that maybe encourage that a little bit to make it easier for people to take ownership of those things, so that we can be purposeful and curative about that, right? Instead of just, we have friendly baristas, for example, maybe, but there might be an element of our design that's working against that.
Yeah.
And we don't even know it.
Yeah. So, essentially thinking about the first impression when you walk in the door, thinking about the convenience of ordering and the clarity of ordering when you walk in the door. Like, do people know where to go and know what to do? It seems really obvious, and usually most places are designed in a way that makes that really clear. And then is it convenient to sit if I want to sit, and is it convenient to sort of have a space that I can kind of call mine? Because part of kind of developing an attachment is that opportunity to kind of know what to expect when you go. And then if you want to stay, some people might take things and take away, but if you want to sit and stay, kind of knowing that there is potentially going to be a place to sit. And um, one of the things that comes into play is the comfort of the seating, and there are different ways to approach it. If seating is very comfortable and allows you to kind of ground yourself in the space, then you might not want to leave. And is that going to be a problem? And I think you have to look at your market and say, like, is it going to work for people to linger, or is it not going to work for people to linger? And if it's not, then less comfortable seating could potentially work, and people will probably understand that and be okay with that. But just creating those opportunities for the folks who come every morning and visit for 15 minutes before they head their own way, is there tables and seating that accommodates that size of a group? Are people going to be able to find a seat that they can kind of call their own, where if they need a little bit of privacy and to do some heads down work, that's going to happen? And then just sometimes too, I think we're going to talk about branding in a little bit while, but having them also know that the values and the kind of the mission, obviously it's about selling coffee and pastries and that kind of thing, but what else is the place about, and do I identify with that, and does that feel right to me? Does that feel like who I am? So I think those are all some things.
Okay, so messaging and branding as part of it, because that's part of the book too. You talk about identity and messaging and branding, and we can get into that. I'm curious about that, because if I'm taking ownership in a coffee shop, it's because I've have some trust, and I've left. It's a part of my life, and it feels very personal. And I would hate to know that I'm exposing that part of myself to them, that part of my life, and they turn out not to be trustworthy because they support this thing, or they treat their baristas bad, or we find something out that is like, oh, I can't go there anymore, I guess. Talk a little bit about that, where branding and messaging and maybe even values, because values feels like a deeper part, because messaging you could do really well, and branding you could do really well, but values don't lie as easy. So talk a little bit about that.
What we're finding, and it seems to be growing in importance, is that people do want establishments to patronize establishments that they can feel good about, and they can assess whether that mission and values aligns kind of with their sensibility. And so people seek out places that they feel reinforce their identity and maybe the person they want to be. And so one thing that's interesting about the millennial generation is they are very, very tuned in to what various establishments, what they support, who they hire, and they really do put their money where their values are. And so if that's your demographic, you got to be very aware of sort of clearly defining sort of who you are and how that works. So again, there's lots of research that's been done on the topic of branding and messaging, and there's some good research by Gilmore and Pine, and they ask that you answer 5 questions and to help you kind of establish your identity. And that can also help a designer. If you're working with a designer or architect, that can also help them kind of shape the design. But just asking yourself, like, who are you at your core as a business? What do you offer others? And then where and when did you become who you are today? And then why are you in business? And then how is your identity manifested? And then once that is established, then you can kind of take it from there in terms of your design. And really, people are looking for consistency, and they're looking, so I think it's also important to understand your target market. For example, a college crowd will probably have different expectations than a group of retirees in, Florida or Arizona, that's going to be a really different demographic. I think messaging and making sure that your, community organizations that you might support, or events that you might hold, or again, people that you might hire, that all kind of ties in with the branding and messaging and kind of showing what your values are.
Right. And so asking yourself these questions, you could go down a path where you choose something pretty general, but it's true, or you can choose something very specific, which is also true. And I suppose you run the risk of either being too general so that it doesn't attract people, or too so specific that it alienates people. So
Yeah.
I suppose there's all sorts of examples of that in design when we present our brand to people.
Absolutely. And an example of one that is super specific in the book, I have a case study on a cafe in Atlanta called Java Cats, and former student Tony Purvis wrote this case study, and it's a coffee shop that supports cats from a local shelter, and so you can come and get your coffee and play with the cats with the goal that hopefully you'll take one home, and they all their profits go towards supporting the animals in the shelter. And so that's really, really specific, and not everybody's going to want to have cats with their coffee, but it seems to work. It's a large enough community that actually, it seems to be sending a message that appeals to enough people that it's working pretty well. But that might not work in another smaller community.
Right. Yeah. And as a side note, not necessarily related, I'm glad that it's balanced in the book because you also have a case study with Black Dog Coffee. So we have dogs and cats represented.
Yeah. Yes. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I have the Black Dog Cafe. That's in Tallahassee,
nice.
Where I am. So.
I mean, yes, I suppose that with your messaging, you're trying to, because people want to be themselves, and so if it's so specific, you have to understand that you're going to, have people, maybe they have a cat allergy, they're not going to come, but
right.
In other situations, it's like if you're just servicing, if you're just serving your community with very specific values that are kind of universal to humans in general, that you're going to attract a large demographic, a large swath of each kind of demographic into your coffee shop, and so. I want to ask, in terms of design, how much branding is too much branding?
No, that's a good question, and there are so many incredibly successful places that gave no thought to branding at all. In fact, the Black Dog Cafe that you mentioned a minute ago is one that. That initially, when they first opened, they were in the back of the American Legion Hall in what used to be a storage closet, and they most of the decor was related to the Legion. So they had all kinds of military paraphernalia on the walls, and they put up like twinkly lights, and they found mismatched chairs, but that was kind of the charm of it, was that it was this sort of out of the way place, but it was totally just functional, like where can we have people sit. They just completely let it sort of evolve organically, and now 25 years later it's a little bit more planful, and it looks like it's some more thought has gone into the interior, but like I said, there are lots of examples where things just evolve and it works out beautifully. And there is a trend right now where a lot of people are rejecting kind of brands and design that sort of feel prescribed and feel sort of corporate, and they're looking for more local and things that feel authentic. They want to have an experience, and they want that experience to be authentic. And so one of the words that keeps coming up is, that striving for authenticity. So kind of can ground the brand in the design, in the local culture, and and history. And so in the book, I talk about authenticity and kind of definitions of it, and sort of what people look for. But just essentially, people want an experience that feels real, and they want things that are sort of genuine and trustworthy. And so obviously everybody's going to bring something different to that process. If you are, if I'm visiting a new town, things may feel really wonderfully authentic to me, but to a local they might not. So that experience, that it's going to be unique to everybody. But if you look at the local culture and the local sort of values and the local history, as well as sort of the vernacular design or the local built culture, those can be ways to kind of help sort of brand it in a way that is unique and is kind of grounded in the local. So another great way is to seek out sort of local artwork, or have a rotation of shows of local artists. That's another way to kind of bring in an authentic element and a local element. There are also some really interesting examples of unbranding, where there was a shop in Seattle that was actually owned by Starbucks that called themselves something different. And when people found out, they felt sort of duped, and it did not go over well at all. So people who want something local, they want it to feel like it really is. So you can, but you can definitely go overboard. But I think if you ground it locally, you're in better shape, or just let it evolve organically and see what happens.
Yeah, that's really interesting, the line between branding so much that it feels inauthentic, and then I almost value a place sometimes. Maybe this is the unbranding or just against branding thing that you were talking about before, where I want them to kind of not care about me, in a sense. I want them to be doing them, so I enter into their world. And so it's not designed specifically. Like a tourist trap would be a great example of the opposite of that, right? Where it's just designed to sort of bring me in and get me to look and feel and all that stuff. But if I find a place that people suggest that's not down an alley, and it's just there because they love tacos so much, and I'm there, it feels more authentic because they weren't really thinking about Chris DiTherio in that moment. They're really thinking about, carne asada and how they can make it a little bit better that day. And I seek that out. And they might say, pay a consultant or somebody to say, we need to rebrand. And then all of a sudden when they do, they lose that thing that made them popular.
Yes. Yeah. Or they try to do something like an example that I can think of is there was a super successful coffee shop real near campus, Florida State University, and it was packed every night, and then they had all these crazy mismatched furniture, and it was brick wall. It was an old car repair shop, and so it had like a garage door that they kept, and it just had so much character. And because it was so packed, they got rid of all that mismatched furniture and bought these bar tables and really uncomfortable bar stools. It completely changed the vibe in there. It made it from sort of, kind of eclectic and just kind of looking like they weren't trying to appeal to you. Like they were just there, and then it went to being like, wow, how many people can we fit in? And it really kind of went downhill after that and eventually closed. So I don't think it was just that change in design that made the difference, I'm sure. But it was interesting. Yeah, it was really interesting.
I think I want to dig into the book a little bit more, but it's almost this idea of, consumers sometimes don't want to allow for people to have an evolution of identity. Because it may still be authentically them. Maybe they always wanted that seating, but they just couldn't do it, and now they can, and they did, and now everyone hates it. So it feels like, well, that's still authentic, but y'all don't like that.
Yeah. 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 for sure.
Well, let's talk about ambience a little bit here, because that's a huge umbrella term that covers basically everything that you experience in a coffee bar. Um, I want to focus more on, though, like lighting, textures, sounds, and smells, which I probably covered everything there. But um, how do we curate these elements in particular? For coffee, it's really important. There's the smell aspect. What music is playing, I guess, textures and lighting are things that we can control. How do we do this in a way that's attractive and removes obstacles for people's enjoyment of the space?
Yeah, no, those are great questions. And all those features, lighting, textures, sounds, smells, all those are going to kind of contribute to that experience. And, we want to have kind of be in a space with kind of a nice vibe. And that varies from person to person on what we like. There's no magic formula, but there are some things that we can do that kind of help give us a shot at creating a good experience. And so lighting is really key. Lighting plays a huge role in ambiance. So there are different kinds of light. There's a light we need to sort of see where we're going so we don't trip over the furniture. That's called ambient lighting. And then lighting that helps us sort of focus on what we might be doing if we're reading, or that's task lighting. And then lighting that just often is just decorative, that sort of adds to the ambiance. So it helps a lot to have several different lighting sources. So if you have access to daylight is fantastic. And so that can be a source of light during the day. But it's nice to have some different types of lighting. And that way you can, and it's nice also if you have the ability to do this, to have some flexibility so that it can change throughout the day. So if lots of daylight streams in during the day, then you may not need much artificial light at all, but at night you might. So having just a nice variety of ways to kind of control the light. Some establishments will even use timers or light sensors to adjust as throughout the year or throughout the day. Another important thing to remember is that lighting has an inherent color. And so some lights are warmer or cooler, and you probably experience that just when you buy, light bulbs for your own home, and that you look at the warmth level on them. And so it's important to think about what that's going to do to the space. Most of the time, really cool lighting isn't going to be as welcoming as a warmer light. Typically, people look better under warmer light. They just look healthier under warmer light and feel better. So cooler light has its place. It's really good for kind of being able to discern colors, or if you have a specific task to perform. But for the most part, a warmer light works better in this type of space. And then you can select lighting fixtures that kind of support the design that can be interesting to look at. And then the lighting for the staff is a whole different subject, because that has to be functional. That has to really provide the lighting that they need to be safe, to be able to do their job. And so you want to think about sort of the lighting where the guests are and the lighting where the workers are, and that might be really different. And then texture. Texture is a great way to provide sort of a richness. It can be visual, like you might have a brick wall. And so our eyes take that in, and we know, because we've touched brick, we know that's a texture, but we may not actually touch it every time we walk into the shop, but it still adds a lot to the experience. And then everything else we experience with our skin, it could be the countertop, it could be, the upholstery if we're sitting in a chair. Those types of things all kind of contribute to the experience too. And then sound plays a role. So we know background music is, we can all relate to how, the difference that makes. And so most of the time you would want it to be quiet enough to allow for conversation. And, the type of music is so personal and unique, and would depend on your target market and
Right.
who's working that day and all those other things. But want to make sure that the music is does allow for conversation. And music's also a great way to help with acoustical privacy, so that it kind of creates a masking sound that allows us to have a conversation that is maybe drowned out by the music a little bit, and so that gives us a feeling of comfort in that we know that our conversation might not be overheard.
And I don't have to listen
And
to someone
then,
else's conversation.
right, exactly. And then the aroma is typically really wonderful in a coffee shop because of, coffee grinding or pastries or that kind of thing. So that kind of just seems to happen very naturally. But probably the other advice I would say is just really be sure that any kind of garbage smells and, restrooms are clean and those types of things, because that actually makes a huge difference in people's perception. A survey I did about 10 years ago, it on like satisfaction in coffee shops showed that like cleanliness was like the number one key to it being important. And then just thinking about what people are going to walk by when they come in too, making sure that you don't have your trash dumpster right next to the, parking lot, so people have to kind of experience that before they come in. Because, you could have like the best coffee and pastries, but if they just had a bad experience walking in, that can make a difference too. So those are a few things about ambiance.
Yeah, I love it. And it's all about working with what you have, also to just do. Sometimes you're limited by your surroundings, and maybe you're in a historic building. I know I've worked in a historic building downtown here where the Historic Society did not allow you to actually, replace the door with a functioning door. So you have to have like an old, basically a drawbridge for a door. And yeah, that's quaint, but not if you're a barista, But so the people can see that, and they're like, we really don't like the fact that we have to keep this here or that here. But I guess you can work around it, which leads me to my next question about like restraints that you have. Sometimes when you open a coffee shop, you might be talking about anywhere from 200-300 square feet, a tiny little place, to 2,000 to 3,000 square feet. And I don't necessarily think that one's better than the other, or maybe it is, for fostering community. But what are the key factors for success in creating a space that's conducive for community, from the small place to the large place?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, I would say that location is one of the essentials to success. Obviously anybody who's going to open an establishment is going to do some research to see kind of what the target market will be and what they can do to sort of serve that target market. And so it needs to be somewhat convenient, maybe on the way to work if it's, a place where people stop in for morning coffee, or convenient for walking or a quick drive. When it comes to the shape and size, I think to help create community especially between patrons and staff, it does help if there's an opportunity for seating. I've seen, some places that have regular clientele and, a super friendly experience, but they are just kind of a grab and go kind of place. So having the opportunity to have at least a little bit of seating really makes a huge difference in opportunities for building community. And architects and interior designers can really help make the most out of just about any space. But it would make a difference, if you're only able to have a small space because that's all that's available, then you might need to be much more careful about quicker turnover for tables and, maybe increasing, your takeaway orders. But if the space is larger, then kind of creating a space for people to gather. And I've even seen places where they have little side rooms where you could have your like a little department meeting there, kind of as a way just to kind of get away for a while. Or I've even seen it where you could have like your parents getting together to chat about like what they're going to do over the summer with their kids, and maybe coming to some kind of a cooperative agreement where, you take this week, I'll take this week. And so it can be a place where people, I've even seen examples where there have been Bible studies in like small little side rooms. And so there are lots of ways with a larger space that you can kind of reach out and sort of bring activities in that will really help.
With a small space, a lot of people are starting a small mobile units, and they're trying to open in department stores, little corners of shared spaces and things like that. And they're trying to figure out how to kind of create the things we've been talking about, which is that place attachment, but they're still kind of untethered from a brick and mortar, like a nice ivy walled,
right.
Red brick place. It'd be nice if that was what it looked like when you walked up to my trailer or to my kiosk, but that it doesn't work. But can we do similar things with that?
Yeah, well, I can think of some examples. There's a really successful coffee shop in a large orthopedic clinic where I live, and it's been around for at least 5 years, and it does really well because it's a large practice and there are tons of people there. But people spill over with their coffee kind of into the waiting area while they're waiting to be called in, and so they end up kind of having the opportunity for some kind of gathering there. Because you do run the risk if it is all just new people every day and mostly kind of takeout orders, then it is a little bit harder to create community. But I think anytime you can have just even a little bit of a sitting area, I'm thinking like of a kiosk on in a park or something, if you've got just a place for people to kind of linger, even if it's just for 10 minutes, even if it's just a simple little, round table and chairs that you're able to pack up, I think that it does create more of a destination.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot we can do with that. I want to talk about different layers of patrons and demographics, because part of community is intergenerational, and you've got people who are older and younger and come from different backgrounds, and we want that diversity. We want to welcome our neighborhoods into our spaces, but sometimes our spaces are not really designed for a variety of different generations or backgrounds, etc. I mean, how do we do that? What do we need to focus on in order to create a space that takes care of different groups' needs?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things you mentioned was accessibility, and just when it comes to access for people who have different abilities, I think following your local, state, national codes will help you do that. If you have a high elderly population, or you have a specific need in your target population, then making sure that you kind of go way above and beyond codes. One example that comes to mind is there's they call it the signing Starbucks. It's in D.C. near Gallaudet University, which is a university for the deaf and hard of hearing. And so they have a signing Starbucks where most of the employees sign, and all the art in the interior reflects kind of really cool stylized signs. And then all the technology sort of supports those who hear and don't hear when they order. But beyond that, beyond accessibility, really researching your target market and making sure you understand the neighborhood in which it's located. So if you cater primarily to the morning office commuters, maybe people who work in nearby buildings, then having a little play area for kids doesn't really make sense. But if your market's primarily a neighborhood coffee shop where people might come and linger on the weekends, then that might be something. I've seen a lot of examples where people either embrace having children there or really don't want children there. And so I think you can, depending on, and you could see the advantages, disadvantages, but deciding kind of, who are you serving and how can you do that? Because that won't work for everybody. And then just recognizing if you have a group of, teens love coffee shops because they can hang out outside the gaze of their parents and they can feel grown up, drinking coffee and so, if you have an after school crowd of teens, that may be something to think about, um, kind of accommodating that group. And then in communities with retirees, just little things can make a huge difference to whether you can serve that community, making sure that you have pretty accessible parking and that you have an easy way there aren't a lot of steps to climb to be able to get up, and just simple things like that can really make a difference in making sure that you can meet those needs. Um, on the interior, if you're in an older community, you may find that you have a lot of retirees in the morning. Especially men seem to like to gather in coffee shops in the morning, and so having a table that will accommodate that can really work. So I guess the bottom line would be to really understand your location and your target market, and then kind of make those adjustments to meet their needs, and then just be willing to change if you see that something isn't working. Be willing to make an adjustment if you need to.
Yeah, there's a lot of mindfulness that goes into that. And, some people are on the verge of opening a coffee shop, and they are able to do that kind of R&D and start right from the get-go with customized for their community solutions. And other people have already made their decisions. They've already poured the concrete. But maybe they're expanding to a second location, and they can start to have a little bit more of a mind to serve that community and build community by learning about it before they build. I have to emphasize here, because there's a lot we've talked about, but there's an incredible amount of information in this book, so much more than what we're talking about. And I definitely want people to make sure that after this conversation, they buy this book. And maybe this is an unfair question to ask you, because there's a multivariate approach that needs to be taken when it comes to creating community. But what would you say are the most compelling factors for people to create this community in their coffee shop? If you just had to pick your top ones, things that you would maybe say, hey, Keys to the Shop listeners, if you're operating a coffee shop or opening one, here are the first things that you probably should do, or the levers you should pull to see a big improvement on community.
Well, I think to get people in, obviously the product has to be good, and then I would say service. And what I mean is mainly friendliness, and the idea that the staff is happy to see you. And I know that can be hard, especially right now. It's often hard to find employees, but I think that makes a huge difference. And then third, I would say just the design, and just that essence that you get when you walk in the space. So those sort of less tangible things that we talked about, just the aroma, what's playing in terms of music. Does it feel welcoming? The fact that I can go and settle in and be comfortable and feel like I can stay a little while at least, and kind of enjoy that. And that's sort of the interior design piece. But I think that doesn't work. It doesn't matter as much if the service and the friendliness isn't there, and of course the product isn't good. So I'd like to put design first, but I think actually it comes after those other things.
Well, I got to say, if I was a coffee shop in Tallahassee and I saw you coming in and enjoying yourself, I'd take that as a really big compliment. Yes. Dr. Waxman, thank you so much for being able to join me on the show again. I really appreciate you and the work you're doing. This is truly invaluable stuff. And so again, people need to get this book. Can you tell us where we can purchase this and where we can learn more about what you've written and what you're studying?
Sure. So the book is called Designing Coffee Shops and Cafes for Community, and it's published by Routledge. And so you can get it either on the Rutledge website, rutledge.com, or it's also available on Amazon. I know right now it's less expensive on Rutledge. They're offering like an I don't know, maybe a 30% discount right now. So it is a little bit cheaper
Ooh.
on Rutledge right now, but it's available on Amazon as well.
Thank you so much again. This was wonderful.
Well, thank you for your interest. I really appreciate it.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you found that episode helpful. There is always something that we can do to create a better environment to promote what we want to see in the coffee shop. It's really easy to make small changes that have a big impact in so much of what our customers want. Not even they know how to articulate, but their behavior is proof that what we have designed is working. And there are so many things that we can take and apply to our lives that Dr. Waxman has shared with us, whether you're thinking of opening a second cafe from scratch or you want to make some small or large changes to your existing space. These are great and practical pieces of advice and guidance that will help you along the way. And certainly I think you need to go out and buy this book and read it for yourself. And you can do that by going to rutledge.com, which is the publisher of the book, or you could go to like barnesandnobles.com, amazon.com. You can find this book pretty much anywhere. Again, Designing Coffee Shops and Cafes for Community. So a huge thank you to Dr. Waxman for joining us on the show. We really appreciate the work you have done to make this world of coffee shops and third places all the better. So thank you again. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode or any other episode of Keys to the Shop, you can go ahead and email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. And also that is the email to use if you are interested in working with Keys to the Shop Consulting. You want to take your coffee shop to the next level, improve your operations, quality, and people, then I am definitely here for you. Let's have a conversation. chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, one of the things I am really excited about coming up here is the official 30-year anniversary of Coffee Fest. It is taking place in Seattle, where it all started 30 years ago. That is at the end of this month in September. If you can make it, I would definitely recommend going to coffeefest.com. If you're not familiar with Coffee Fest is a trade show, but it's more than a trade show. It's a center for resourcing and equipping you to run a great coffee shop. When you're on coffeefest.com, you can see all of the educational content available, lectures, trainings, workshops, panel discussions. There's the competitions like latte art and cold brew. The trade show floor is there, of course. You get to interact with amazing vendors to help you stock your coffee shop with the best stuff. And then on top of that, and some would say maybe even one of the main draws, is the community that you have around you. People just like you wanting to run great coffee shops together under one roof. It's really energetic, dynamic, and you can use the code KEYS, K-E-Y-S, to get 50% off your registration over at coffeefest.com when you sign yourself and your team up to go to the show. Again, that's KEYS, K-E-Y-S, and get 50% off your registration. If you are going to the show, make sure you keep an eye out for me. I'll be judging latte art. I'll also have a booth, and I definitely would love to say hello to you. Again, check them out over at coffeefest.com. And with that, that is the end of our show today, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me. Go out there and start making your coffee shop and your coffee shops a hub for community. Have an amazing day. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.